Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Role of intellect in understanding Islam. The Quran, when we read it, quite apart from the fact that it emphasizes over and over again the fact that in order for us to be able to understand the Quran, for us to appreciate the Almighty's blessings, His signs, we have to use our intellect. We've got to continue to understand, seek the truth, and for that purpose, use our ability to question, to critically examine, to find out. In other words, to use our intellect. Quite apart from that reality, which you find spread across the entire text of the Quran, there are three important passages that I would like to mention to emphasize that reality even more, still further. One of them is the fact that it's not just that the Almighty is mentioning that you must use your intellect. It's a good idea. You would be a good person. The Almighty is condemning those who don't use their intellect. So, Surah Anfal, chapter 8, verse 22 says, Inna sharrad dawabi indallah. The worst kind of beasts in the eyes of Allah, as-summul bukmul lazina la yaqilun, are those humans who are deaf and dumb. In other words, they don't use their intellect. La yaqilun. I think a condemnation of not using intellect can go no further than that. It is the strongest condemnation that one can imagine of, which the Almighty has mentioned in the Quran. That if somebody is not using his, her intellect, and let's be clear, the Quran is a book of religion. The Quran is not talking about mathematics, physics, chemistry. If at all something has been mentioned in that area, it's only indirect. It's being used for bringing it to the use of religion. It's talking about religion, religious attitude, religious understanding. Those who refuse to use their intellect, God says, they are worse than beasts. Another important passage of the Quran, quite often I find ignored by Muslims, is the passage whose reference is very easy to remember. It's verse 100 of chapter 10. So if you write its reference, it's 10:100. Surah Yunus, verse 100, the Almighty says, Ma kana li nafsin an tu'mina. No human can believe, illa bi-iznillah, except by the will, by the leave of God. By the way, by belief here, it is not talking about the belief that you and I think one gets from the hospital where one is born to a Muslim mother. That's just an accident of birth. That's a huge misunderstanding that it is belief. I mean, you were born to a Muslim mother, most of you, most of us, and a huge number of humans God Himself arranges to be born to Christian mothers, Hindu mothers, Chinese mothers. That's not what faith is according to the Quran. It's a real, genuine faith. So the Quran says, Ma kana li nafsin an tu'mina. It's not possible for a human to believe illa bi-iznillah, except by God's leave, His permission. And then the verse goes on to say, وَيَجْعَلُ الرِّجْسَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ لَا يَعْقِلُونَ. And He casts filth garbage, dirt to be spread across those who don't use their intellect. Now, if you look at this mention of the verse in the reverse order, what it is saying is that if you're not going to use your intellect, then you will be overcome, overwhelmed by dirt and filth, moral dirt of emotionalism, hatred, jealousy, and so on. And this is going to prevent you from believing properly, truly, genuinely. For God only permits you to believe. And God's decision to sanction, grant belief to humans is based purely on merit. Allow me to say that it's a huge propaganda of Muslims, as well as Christians, as well as Jews, that faith you get accidentally because of birth. The Quran is saying that faith, the ultimate reason, criterion which the Almighty is going to apply to decide as to whether a person is going to succeed or not, is what you get as a consequence of the individual using his, her intellect properly. A third mention of the Quran which I would want to point out is in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 30 onwards, where the Almighty is telling us that when He announced His decision to create man, وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. Before angels are the beings about whom we have this understanding that they just follow what they are asked to do. سَمِعْنَا وَأَطَعْنَا وَيَفْعَلُونَ مَا يُؤْمَرُونَ. But when this very important decision of the Almighty was put across, they didn't say, yes, sir. They said, قَالُوا أَتَجْعَلُوا فِيهَا مَنْ يُفْسِدُ فِيهَا وَيَسْفِكُ الدِّمَاءَ. They raised serious questions, reservations. Are you telling us that you're going to create therein those who are going to shed the blood of each other? They will kill each other and cause mischief on earth. The Almighty in response didn't say, shut up. How dare you ask these questions? He said, Inni a'lamu ma la ta'lamun. I know what you don't know. And then he went on to cause Adam alayhi salam to go through a process which enabled the angels to be convinced that what the Almighty decided was absolutely spot on, perfect, makes a lot of sense. If you allow me the facility, I'll just paraphrase what the Quran says. The response of the Almighty to the angels' question was, call it objection, that, you know what, you're not wrong, but you have only looked at one side of the picture. You have not looked at the complete picture. You have, as a consequence of learning that Khalifa, man, is going to be free, a free agent, concluded that this freedom is going to be misused by man to cause mischief on earth. The point that you have missed is that there are going to be many others who will properly, positively use the same freedom. And that's what that's what the reason I'm creating man for. And therefore, he showed to angels through Adam some humans, outstanding humans, who were to, despite their freedom, behave properly and achieve higher levels of excellence in morality and spirituality. That's what it means that he taught them their names, and he introduced those whose names they were to the angels. What I'm trying to say in a nutshell is that the Quran is telling us that the only proper religious way of behaving in this world is to use the most important faculty that God has given us, which is our intellect. However, Muslims in large numbers have an inclination, feeling that they ought not to use their intellect in religious matters. And they make sure that they don't use their intellect in religious matters. Instead, what they say is, it's your passion, it's your emotions, which count, and not your intellect. If you will use your intellect, you will go astray. You will be overcome by Satan. Now, why do they say it? They sometimes present some religious arguments to defend their case. So, for example, at times they would say that, faith is blind. Yu'minuna bil ghayb. Those who are God fearing, the Quran says they are the ones who yu'minuna bil ghayb. And the kind of impression one gets from their understanding is, what it's saying is blind faith. Why do you believe in God and the hereafter and God, divine revelation? Because my mother believed, and her mother also believed, completely forgetting the fact that John's mother believed something else, and so did whatever, Tendulkar's mother, whatever. They have completely different set of understanding that they inherited. The fact of the matter is that the Quran is saying in this particular passage that believers are those who believe without seeing, who believe without demanding that what they are required to believe in should be first shown to them, and then they believe. They are such intelligent, rational, reasonable people that they know that the world that they are living in has two categories of realities. Some realities are those which you have to just see and believe. Well, for that, the word belief is not correct. You just see them. And if you can't see them, there's something wrong with your eyes. Probably you have not been putting on the correct number glasses. And they know that there are other realities which you can't see. And therefore, you have to use your intellect. And it's in this domain that the Almighty has required believers to use their intellect to come to the correct understanding. One of the other important arguments that they present is that the Quran says that a good believer is the one who says, Sami'na wa ata'na. I listen and I obey. They say that had there been an important role of intellect involved in performing religious acts, the Almighty should have said that they listen, they understand, intellectualize, and they obey. The fact of the matter is that this again is not a good argument. The reason is that here the Almighty is negating the base desires of people who, despite the fact that they have already believed in the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, they still refuse to follow, to be obedient. But why should they believe in the Messenger? Why should they believe in the Quran? I tell you honestly, the Quran is full of, replete with arguments after arguments. The entire Quran is convincing the reader that, look here, this book is from God. How can you deny this fact? And all those arguments are intellectual arguments, arguments that demand the attention of the intellect of the reader. Just briefly, there are four arguments, four categories, chapters of arguments that the Quran has presented to the reader to feel convinced that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the messenger of God. The argument of his character, the argument of the text, the beauty, the miracle, etc. The argument of the prophecies that were already there before he came to this world in the earlier books, and the argument of the prophecy that he made, which came true during his lifetime. Uh, what should an individual do when he is behaving in the religious domain? The answer is quite obviously he should use his intellect. The question is, he's not a scholar. The answer is, scholars not are prophets. And all scholars are not saying the same thing. So, why should I believe that my scholar is saying the right thing and others are saying the wrong things? Well, I think it's quite natural that if a person says that I will follow my scholar so long as I do not get a good reason to believe that in certain areas his point of view is not sound. That's fine. That's natural. But you simply cannot refuse to look at the other presentations, arguments that are presented by other scholars. And when you get the other arguments, you've got to take them seriously. You've got to take them honestly. You have to take the right decision. It's not just a luxury, it's not just something great, it is absolutely binding that we always be fair, even if in being fair it goes against our own self interests or the interests of our parents or our relatives. Even if in being fair we are benefiting our enemy, we've got to be fair. And therefore, no matter what the question, more particularly if it's a question of religious matter, then we've got to be fair in our judgment, and that really means that we've got to use our intellect as best as we can. Despite doing it, it's not necessary that we'll all agree. It's not necessary that we'll come to the right conclusion, but it is absolutely necessary that we use our intellect properly, fairly. And that really means that we listen to all scholars as much as is possible, as much as our constraints allow, and will accept and follow what we think a particular scholar is saying correctly based on his arguments about a certain matter. Sadly, this is the last statement in this presentation. Brother Shahid is right.
When it comes to intellect, what is your stance on the current issue of this Holland cartoons thing? What should Muslims do in UK, Pakistan, and throughout the world? Because it's a major issue for all the Muslims.
They should do what the Japanese Muslims did in response to the caricatures of Denmark. You know what they did? They decided that living in Japan, this issue has been raised about our Prophet, Allah's mercy be on him. From that day onwards, they collected funds and they decided that every year they're going to invite a Muslim scholar who is going to tell the Japanese people who our Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was, what was his seerah, what was his character, what was his message. What a beautiful response. Instead of shouting, instead of raising slogans, instead of blocking roads, instead of breaking, destroying public facilities, they decided that it has now become all the more important that we should use the opportunity of introducing the right image of the Prophet. Just two more things. One, brothers and sisters, don't forget, you like it or not, you are the representatives of the Prophet in this society. Non-Muslims do not know anything about our Prophet except for what they see in us. So, no matter what we do, we're actually reflecting that this is the message that we stand for. So, we must know our responsibility. The second thing, in order for the non-Muslims to be informed, we need to be polite and we need to continue to engage in a discussion with them. I can tell you about two relatively recent examples. One of the person who was a part of the team of filmmakers who made a film on those lines. He became a Muslim. There was, an inclination in him to understand what the message was, and he went to Medina in his own understanding what he could do to say sorry to the Prophet. He converted to Islam. The other example is the example of a person who is very aggressive in his demand that in Switzerland the minarets of the mosques should be removed so that it should not be a prominent symbol for people to know that Muslims pray over here. Such were his sentiments. But the Almighty had his own decision regarding him. He also became a Muslim. Don't forget that Umar Raziallahu anhu was also a very strong opponent of Islam until such time that the Almighty allowed him to embrace Islam. And don't forget the fact that Khalid bin Walid, for 18 years after the declaration of the message of Islam by the Prophet, remained a non-believer. And during these 18 years, he fought three prominent big battles in which on the other side were the companions as well as the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him. So this is a world where people will disagree with you, will ask you questions, will raise objections, and at times they'll also be insulting. If you want to do something through some legal approach, I think it should be done. Talk to the authorities that there should be a way to decently express views. Tell them that these are double standards, that you cannot talk about Holocaust, but people talk about our Prophet in that manner. Those legal measures and in the right forums should be adopted. But other than that, showing emotions without arranging for the people who are doing these foolish things to know what our message and our Prophet ﷺ stood for, I think it would tantamount to losing a tremendous opportunity of introducing him and the message he brought.
Is it also safe to say that it's best not to react?
Yes,
Better
We-
not to react either way.
we are certainly hurt,
Yes.
but the Quran tells us, remain steadfast, remain patient, and itfa billati hiya ahsan. Repel what is evil in a way which is good. And tell yourself that these are the kind of trials which the Prophet ﷺ himself went through. It's not an occasion for me to go into the details, but the Quran mentions in a number of passages the reality that people not just opposed him, they ridiculed him, hurled blasphemic remarks, some of which, by the way, have been mentioned, quoted in the Quran. We recite them. You know why? Because the Almighty would want us to know that that's the kind of reaction that would happen. The Prophet of God, may Allah's mercy be on him, is not just my Prophet. Sometimes people say that if somebody says something against my father, what is going to be my reaction? Well, I tell them that he's not just my father, he's everybody's father. And some of them don't as yet realize that he is more than their father. And for it to be put across properly, we've got to be patient.
But I think also, I just want to comment, and obviously your opinion, that doesn't just apply to, obviously the Danish cartoons are highlighted internationally, and because of social media, we get a lot of petitions, sign this and sign that. But don't you think this is a problem in our Indo-Pak situation, where we have different sects amongst the religion. Don't you think that should be across the board, that we should not be insulting to each other either? Forget the Danish cartoons, that will come a little later on.
Allow me to say, as probably you rightly pointed out, the Quran says, do not use abusive language against their gods, lest they should use the same language for Allah. I quite often wonder how Muslims are able to use foul language for individuals whom we don't believe to be prophets, but somebody else believes to be prophet. How is it possible? It is a completely blatant violation of what the Quran is saying. I want my prophet to be respected. Therefore, I will not disrespect any individual whom somebody else respects. I will disagree. I will say that I have my reasons to believe that your claim is incorrect. I cannot use the kind of language and the kind of attitude which people are showing towards some people whom others believe in. It's wrong. I know it's wrong. Their arguments are weak. Let them know about it. How can we use the kind of language that we are using? So I think in order for us to deserve the respect of non-Muslims for our Prophet, we must show to the non-Muslims that we in turn are showing our respect to your revered personalities. Otherwise, these are double standards. I mean, what do you mean?
But you see, millions Christians are insulting Allah Ta'ala.
Yeah.
Millions Christians, every Christian, most of the Christians are insulting Allah Ta'ala.
And what are you
So
doing?
that is the hardest Allah Ta'ala. You see, you know the verse.
True.
So we are not saying anything about that because we are not allowed to say.
Absolutely. I agree.
But they are insulting Allah, we don't say anything. What about Prophet? We can do the same.
You see, I had the opportunity of sharing a presentation with a Christian scholar in Pakistan. And the question was blasphemy. And he said something which I think was not wrong. He said, you know what? My existence as a Christian is actually a blasphemy for you. So why don't you kill me? So it's a completely ridiculous behavior that we are showing. It's tough, it's not easy, but I think it's important. We must all of us know that if we are not just being emotional because of our own ego, personal or collective, collective ego sometimes can be very strong. We can be enemies of each other, but as a group, whatever Pakistanis or Muslims, together we can be collective enemies of others. But obviously, we need to ask our religion, our religious text, as to what should be the right behavior. And I think it should be nothing but the fact that we should continue to present the right point of view, the right understanding about our Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, who is the Prophet for the entire mankind. The entire humankind is his ummah. A part of humankind has already believed in him, and the rest is awaiting belief when they are going to be presented with the arguments of belief properly.
But my question is, why those people tolerate insult of Allah Ta'ala?
It's because the way we have been presented with religion is there is this emotional attachment to the Prophet, Allah's mercy be on him, which is highlighted, but the same kind of emotions are not presented to be attached to our relationship with God.
We should have more with Allah Ta'ala than
That is what the Quran says. وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ. Those who truly believe, they are more strong in their love of Allah.
Can we start the last topic?
I know why you come
And
here, yes.
can you cover some aspect of zakat as well, which is very important, especially those who are living in UK?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This is the fourth part of my presentation, and it is probably the most difficult part. So if you are tired or you feel sleepy, you're allowed to not be here. It is regarding Islamic finance, mortgage, riba. How much time do we have?
We have to finish 9:15,
Quarter-
including question.
Right. So another 20 minutes on my part and then question answers. Again, I will repeat a statement which probably I've already mentioned, but sometimes, some statements need to be mentioned over and over again, repeated over and over again. The Almighty repeats فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ over and over again. So sometimes repetition is important. I am making a presentation on this issue, which is one understanding. Just understand the logic, the reasons, the argument behind it. If it appeals to you, accept it. If it doesn't, don't accept it and make your statement. We will allow you to make statement. But simply because what you are coming across is different from your point of view, it is not a good reason for you to react sharply and angrily. I don't have any security guards around me, so I want to be careful. There are two components of God's religion. One, the Quran describes as Al-Hikmah, and the other it describes as Al-Kitab. Al-Hikmah is comprised of, again, two components: moral principles, which are shared by the entire humanity, and beliefs, which explain, justify moral principles. That is, the entire humanity has a long list of do's and don'ts which they agree to. The question arises, why is it that there is an agreement? The answer is, there's only one God who created all of us, and therefore no wonder we all have been designed similarly. The other question is, why this understanding of right from wrong? The answer is, because in this life you are being tested, and in the next life you are going to be held accountable for it. The question is, how do we feel confident? The answer is, God has sent His messengers, His divine revelation, to convince people, to let them know why do they have these moral principles, this ethical understanding. That is Al-Hikmah. Al-Kitab is the law, Sharia, which is based on Al-Hikmah. While operating morally in this life, we all agree on many things which our nature is aware of. But in some matters of morality, we disagree, or we are unclear. It's not as clear as many other things. The Almighty has chosen to give His clear verdict on some areas of morality which are debated, where there is confusion. So I'll just give you one example for me to come to my point. All humans, almost, unless there is some degeneration that has taken place, know that goats, sheep, and camels, etc., are to be consumed. They are edible. They are worthy of being eaten, their meat. Nobody, generally speaking, would eat the meat of a lion or an elephant or a dog or a cat, etc. So humans are quite clear about it. There was one animal which was right in the middle. If you categorize it, and in this country you can see it in some places, it's like sheep, goats, that is pig. It's like them, it's the same category. However, this animal consumes meat. And therefore the question was that should it be here or there? The Almighty said it's there. Pig is not allowed. That was Sharia. The Quran doesn't mention anything about dogs or cats or whatever because that was clear itself. Likewise, in matters of morality in the domain of financial, economic transactions, there is a long list of do's and don'ts which humans already agree to. So, in the present times, we know that most of the renowned world business schools offer a course on business ethics. That course doesn't normally mention anything from the Bible or the Quran, or even if it's mentioned, it's a very small part of the syllabus. And yet, a lot of stuff is covered when business ethics is discussed. Why? Because everybody knows what is good, what is bad, what is desirable, what is undesirable. However, there is one particular aspect of economic interest where there is a dispute, and that is if a lender gives a valuable to a borrower and the borrower consumes it and is not sure whether he will be able to recreate it, can the lender demand from the borrower that the value has to be returned under all circumstances plus a definite increment, something that is called riba, interest, sood? As I said, people dispute, people disagree. The Almighty gave His clear verdict that it's wrong, it's forbidden. So that's where it's coming from. The Almighty has given His basic principle on economic matters in at least two verses. Verse 29 of Surah Nisa and verse 188 of Surah Al-Baqarah. 4:29 and 2:188. Believers, La ta'kulu amwalakum bainakum bil batil. Don't eat each other's wealth unjustifiably. That's the principle. So everything that comes in the scope of this prohibition is not acceptable. Telling lies, theft, deceiving, giving a commodity which you promised, which is other than what you promised, going against your covenants, promises, etc., etc. However, in regards to the example that I give of another arrangement, the Almighty, going by the same spirit, the same principle, that don't eat each other's wealth unjustifiably, He has also brought riba in the same category. Now, why is it so? Probably you might be able to understand the reason through an example which I will give to clarify as to why is it that rent is allowed but riba, interest, is not allowed. Quite often people confuse the two. There are two types of assets, commodities. One type of asset is the one which, when you use it, it disappears. It is exhausted, consumed. Like rice, like wheat, the tea that we had, and money. You use it, and it goes, it disappears. If you are asking somebody to give you money or rice or wheat because you are in need, then God Almighty expects that we should give it without expecting anything. That's the best way. We have been blessed with more wealth. If there are people who are poor, we should give them without even expecting anything, without expecting the article, the thing to be returned. However, if somebody doesn't want to do it for whatever reasons, then the Almighty expects that we should get back as and when the person is in a position to return only what has been given. But if the person is demanding it, borrowing it for the purpose of business, then we know that the businessman, in order to employ, invest, use it properly, he will first spend that amount. And when he will spend it on his business to purchase raw material, to employ some people, to advertise, or whatever, the amount would disappear. And then he will work to be able to recreate that wealth, that amount, that value, and much more. So all people who do business, they do in the hope of making profits. However, despite best efforts on the part of an individual, we know that there are several reasons, hundreds of reasons, why a business can fail for no fault of the businessman. There are so many outside extraneous reasons why a business can fail. The Almighty is telling us that if you give loan to somebody in business, you cannot force him to return your original amount, its value, plus a definite increment. If you come to learn about the fact that the business that you had lent the funds to has failed, the best thing is that don't demand anything. The second best thing is that you demand what your value was, but only when the business is in a position to give back. The third possibility is not allowed at all, that you know that the business has failed, and yet you are saying that I demand my value plus an increment. That is not allowed. That is what riba is. In the case of the other assets, which are of the nature that when you use them, they stay intact. Nothing happens to them except for a minor depreciation, which is notional, which really means nothing. Sometimes, or in many cases, the assets get depreciated somewhat, little bit physically, but get appreciated in value. So that is immaterial, irrelevant. The important thing is that I borrow this table from you, I use it for a month, I pay an amount which is towards its rentals. Next month I feel that I don't need it. I can't afford it. It's not good. I should get some other table. The table is there. I'll just return it to you. No harm done. So there is a huge difference between riba, interest, and rent. Take another example. You get, I don't know what the amount is, let's say 50,000 pounds from somebody, and you get an apartment. I'm not too sure whether I'm mentioning the right value. You get an apartment from that amount. And, that apartment is given to you of that value by somebody. The person owns that apartment. You use it and you give rentals. And one day you go out with your family on a picnic and you come to learn about the fact that, oh gosh, the apartment is gone. It has collapsed for one reason or another, the owner of the apartment would not come to you demanding that the apartment be given back to him, because everybody knows that the apartment belonged to the owner. But what is strange is that when the same £50,000 are given to a business for the business to use it usefully, and the business gets bankrupt or insolvent, and not able to make profits, this person demands that my 50,000 plus a definite increment is given. That's what the Almighty said is absolutely unacceptable. There is no problems as far as rent is concerned. So that really means that rent is allowed and interest is not allowed. Now, what is the problem with riba? I've already mentioned. It's unfair, and the Almighty would not want us to ever write an agreement where we are telling the borrower that you have no choice. I am so greedy that I'm telling you, so selfish, that I don't care whether your business goes well or not. I want my principal value intact plus an increment. That obviously is silly, is foolish. And allow me to say that today, the present modern banking system is beginning to realize that it is foolish, stupid, unfair, unworkable. And therefore, I believe that it is moving in the right direction. Not that everything about it is correct, but I think we should help them understand that this is what our God has been telling us right from the beginning. The question of mortgage, to me, mortgage is hire purchase agreement. You buy a house, or you don't buy a house, you acquire a house for which you are given funds, and as a consequence of that help given to you, you start living in that house and you start making payments, installments, which has two components. One part of it, sooner or later, goes towards the value of that house, and the other goes towards the rent of the house. The way it is calculated, it is the rental component which takes the lion's share in the first few years payment of installments. But then later on, the share of the payment towards principal starts increasing, and therefore you also become a part owner, and the share of the mortgage society or the bank, it begins to decline, and thus in a span of 25 years or whatever, you become the complete owner of it. It is brilliant. Honest to God, it is such a brilliant facility that if this facility is not available, people remain homeless, for all throughout their lives, paying hefty rents and not even owning a small washroom, But in this case, it's something which enables you to get the entire house. The only trouble is, God forbid, in the middle of the arrangement, you find yourself unable to pay any further installments. The house is there, the house is sold, and from the proceeds, the expectation is settled. There is only one problem which sometimes can happen, which needs to be solved. And that problem is, there are times in periods of recession when the house is going to be sold, it may not be able to fetch the kind of price that would enable the lessee, the mortgagee, or the borrower, if you want to call him, to pay the amount on the basis of the proceeds. That's one problem that needs to be solved. But other than that, no matter what kind of mortgage arrangement you are going for, it's a hire purchase arrangement. The mention of the expression term interest in mortgage arrangement is use of an incorrect expression for what is different from what the word means. So I keep telling people that if there are some people who, for some reasons, start describing sheep and goats as pigs, they would not become pigs. Pigs have their own character, good or bad, and sheep and goats have their own character. They are very different. Likewise, rent is not interest, and interest is not rent. I've been asked to say something about zakat. I mean, zakat is well known. It is to be paid by all Muslims on their savings, which they do not use, and therefore some assets remain unused, dormant, saved throughout the year. It is decided that one day of the year is going to be employed for the purpose of calculating as to how much value is zakatable, or how much value is it that on which you will pay zakat, which is 2.5%. But this is a zakat on savings. The same way, Prophet ﷺ also gave the law of zakat on production, which is normally called ushr, and it is generally understood that there was another levy on the agricultural produce, which was 5% in case if the land that is cultivated is watered artificially. That is, you invest to get irrigation done. But if it is dependent upon rainfall, then the output is going to be subject to a 10% levy of ushr, which is actually zakat. It's a compulsory binding payment. And the third possibility is that you're neither arranging for any investment to get any output, nor are you putting any efforts, like in case if sometimes you are able to accidentally lay your hands on a treasure. You say to your gardener that, you just take it, dig our backyard, and we'll use fertilizers. And he comes to you telling you that I've found lots of gold here, So that's going to be without any effort, without any investment, for which the levy is 20%. But what is it? There are two possibilities. One possibility is that it is only meant for agricultural produce. The other possibility, which we believe is the right understanding, is that it is something that was meant to be applicable to all processes of production. So agricultural produce was what was the way of producing in a big way at that time. Now we have industries, now we have service industries. All of it has to be subject to either 5% or 10% of levy. A third category of zakat is the category of livestock, which has its own details, which generally speaking, it's also 2.5% of the total animals that we have. And in all these cases, you've got a minimum amount or value less than which you don't have to pay zakat. Whom should you pay zakat to? Well, zakat should be received ideally by the state, by the rulers. If they don't do it, then you pay zakat on your own. Another question is that if rulers don't ask you to pay zakat, but ask you to pay taxes, what should you do? Again, there are a number of possibilities. Some people would say, pay zakat as well as pay taxes. Now, practically what happens is that if you are a staunch Muslim, you will calculate and pay zakat properly, but unfortunately you will not pay taxes properly. That's I'm talking about in our country. Because taxes, they say, are charged by a government, by a state which is non-Islamic, un-Islamic, and zakat we'll pay. The other point of view is that you pay your taxes properly, you calculate your zakat properly, because zakat was to be collected by the state to be spent on different avenues, as well as on some aspects which have to do with the affairs of the state machinery. Therefore, if your zakat calculation tells you that you have paid more taxes than your zakat has already been paid. You are encouraged to spend some more amount in the way of Allah, but you had to pay zakat to your rulers, who instead of asking you to pay zakat, they are asking you to pay taxes. Uh, that's one possibility. The other possibility is that you have zakat more to be paid and there are lesser taxes that you've paid. Then obviously the residual is going to be paid or spent in the way of Allah. I think I've said more than what I was expected to in the time that
I
we're going
got
to.
two questions.
Yeah. Right.
One is you were saying that if the business is failing, the person who gave money shouldn't ask for the amount or the interest. If suppose business is not failing at fulfillation, then is it right for him to ask extra money or not?
Write it down in the agreement that I am giving you this amount and I expect you to give me in return a certain profit. It could be variable based on the performance of the business. It could be fixed based on the understanding that the borrowing business will earn more profits than that fixed percentage. And the agreement should say that if the borrowing business will make profits less than the fixed amount charged, then that charge is not going to be taken. Lesser amount will be taken. And if the business runs into losses, then except for the principal amount, nothing is going to be charged. If that is the agreement, there is nothing wrong with it.
My second question is that you were saying about mortgage of for your own house. Will it apply if person is buying more houses? The same thing or it is different?
I think this question arises because some people probably have decided that although mortgage is incorrect, unacceptable, yet for a person who doesn't have a house, if he or she, in order to get a house, goes for mortgage, it should be reluctantly allowed. But for a second or third house, we cannot allow it. What I am trying to humbly put across is the understanding that mortgage is not incorrect at all. So whether it's the first house or the second house or whatever, it's a very decent arrangement whereby you are going into hire purchase.
This is sir, what about the
Sir, you have to moderate, sir.
and what about the vehicle mortgage, sir?
As I mentioned, you have to look at the asset. You see, we have to understand what God has desired from us. The understanding can be disputed, but the understanding that I have put across is that when you are talking about assets like these, like this, which when we are using them, they stay intact, the charge that you make is actually rent. When you are using assets like water, you consume, it's gone, then you will have to decide that nothing except the principal value you will get back, or if it's business, then if the business does well, it's only then you will get it, and not in any other cases. So vehicles are also like houses, like tables. When you use them, they stay intact, and therefore rentals charged on them are okay, and if you do higher purchasing of them, that too is okay.
अगर second house या third भी है, suppose
ज़कात का इस पे क्या होगा, क्योंकि हमें तो वैल्यू इसका पता नहीं है कि इसमें मेरिट अभी कितना शेयर है या बैंक का कितना शेयर है। और इसी तरह अगर सपोज एक कमर्शियल प्लाट है लेकिन फ़िलहाल उससे कुछ भी नहीं आता, वो जस्ट अ प्लाट है, उसकी वैल्यू बहुत बड़ी है लेकिन मेरे लिए इससे इनकम कोई नहीं है, तो फिर इस पे मैं ज़कात किस तरह दूँ?
देखिए, हर मामले में जो ओपिनियन होगा वो कुछ उसूलों की बुनियाद पर होगा जिसमें इख्तलाफ हो सकता है। आपने एक प्लॉट लिया है और आपने उस प्लॉट पर मकान बनाना है और आपका अपना मकान अभी कोई नहीं है, आप किराए के मकान पर रह रहे हैं और आप उम्मीद करते हैं कि जब आप इस प्लॉट के बाद इतने पैसे जमा कर लेंगे या एक और प्लॉट ख़रीद लेंगे तो उसको बेच के इस पे मकान बनाएंगे, तो इस पे मेरी अंडरस्टैंडिंग में ज़कात नहीं दी जाएगी। लेकिन आपका अपना मकान पहले से मौजूद है और आपने एक और ज़मीन ली है या मकान लिया है, तो अब इस पे ज़कात लगेगी। मगर मैंने मकान का जिक्र कर दिया है तो अब एक और बात भी सुन लें कि
सपोज माँ बाप से आया हो वो प्लाट कमर्शियल है, मैंने
माँ बाप से आया हो या दादा दादी से आया हो, उससे कोई फ़र्क नहीं पड़ता, अब ये आपका है। इसलिए जब वो आपका हो गया तो आपने इस पे ज़कात देनी है। मैं गुजारिश कर रहा था कि अगर वो मकान आपने किराए पे दे दिया है तो अब हमारी अंडरस्टैंडिंग में किराया एक सर्विस है, एक प्रोडक्शन है, प्रोडक्शन ऑफ सर्विस। इसमें उस किराए पर 10% दिया जाएगा, ना कि मकान की वैल्यू पर 2.5% दिया जाएगा।
In the Quran, where is riba is mentioned, there is charity always mentioned. There is link.
Right.
Wherever riba is always charity. It's not that money we lending people who deserve charity. We give them and ask more for them. That's riba in that sense. If somebody poor who need charity, instead of giving them charity, people give, who are soodkhor, they give them money and ask for more. Maybe Allah is mentioning about those situation. If you take from those people, increase riba, Allah and Messenger declare war on them. That's like riba. And there's like a deal, 275, Surah Baqarah. People who eat riba, they say al-bay. The special deal is like a riba. Allah says, I allow riba, I allow deal and forbid riba. So there's deal is between like a bank, we could make a deal, give them 100,000 pound and they say, look, I'm making a deal, give me that much money. So that's like an understanding deal. Even Arabic, when they make with the bank, they say al-bay, bay, bay, bay. So that might be al-bay. People say that giving people loan to people who deserve zakat and asking them, that's a riba. That's Allah forbids. And al-bay, dealing with the bank, is allowed. And wherever riba is mentioned, there is always zakat in the whole Quran.
You see, my understanding, again, very humble understanding, is that the Quran is not a book of definitions. The Quran does not give a certain expression, word that is well known, a new meaning. Riba is what is known to be riba. Like zina is what is known to be zina. The Quran uses a word which is there in the language, expressed and completely known to all people, to mean what it means, without assigning any new meanings to it. Because assigning a new meaning to an expression which already has its own understanding would cause confusion. Then I think the Quran should have done much more, should have actually stopped people from understanding from riba what it was ordinarily, traditionally understood, and should have said that, look here, this is what I am telling you riba is. Riba, interest, sood, we all know what it is. It's actually giving as a lender to the borrower an amount, a value which is of the nature that when you use, it consumes.
So what's the riba word mean?
Uh, the word riba is a noun.
Yes.
It is like in Arabic, all other nouns are actually based on a certain root, which is quite apart from what the word means. The meanings of any noun are what people are understanding from it. So, for example, if I was to say that, do you have television in your house? You will not ask me that, telly has one meaning and vision has another meaning. So, are you saying that some kind of a transfer of vision is what you are talking about? Well, I'll say, for God's sake, sir, please, television is a box, an idiot box, which we all know is what it is. And everybody knows what its meanings are. I'm asking you about it. So, the words that are employed in the construction of a noun become irrelevant when it comes to identifying what that noun means. Yes, sometimes it is useful for understanding the spirit of that noun, why that noun was given that name, by going into the root. But riba, as I said, is always well known. Like, for instance, theft is known. Like, for instance, as I said, zina is known. You don't have to
I
define it.
understand. But like Surah 30, there's riba is used twice in that. I forgot the ayah, which is meaning in that doesn't increase.
وَمَا آتَيْتُم مِّن رِبًا
Yes.
لِيَرْبُوَ فِي أَمْوَالِ النَّاسِ
So there's
فَمَا
riba.
يَرْبُو عِندَ اللَّهِ.
Yeah.
Right. You know what? There, the word riba has been used as a noun, and then the same noun which has in its root the verb, that verb has also been used. So liyarbua in the la yarbu in the la would mean it would not increase in the eyes of God. So yes, I'm not denying the fact that television does have tele and vision. What I'm saying is that the word, when it is used for a particular noun, it's well known and everybody can identify the item, the act, the crime which that noun is expressing, uh, quite apart from the fact that its letters are actually giving us an additional meaning which would help us in knowing its spirit, but would not help us in giving a different meaning or definition to the word. I hope this confusing statement is understood.
Can I take you back to zakat, please?
Yeah.
Now, Islamic finance, as I understand, is internationally, the principles of Islamic finance in the macro sense are internationally defined, and there is an agreement on that. Is there an agreement on the zakat where all these scholars have joined together and defined it as to how it should be calculated?
Uh,
So I'm equating zakat, which is a microfinance, because it affects individuals, whereas mortgages and the other investments are macrofinance, which basically is a corporate activity. And I would like to know whether there is an agreement on the principles of zakat. And is that accepted by everybody?
let me just comment on the prelude to the question that you've built up. Uh, zakat, as I mentioned in my initial presentation, is to be collected by the state. and therefore it very much has a macroeconomic dimension. It only has a microeconomic dimension when I and you are going to individually use those funds uh, on purposes that we think are more deserving. Uh, when it comes to the question of whether Muslims agree on what zakat is, in principle, yes. The Quran has used the word zakat like it has used the word
Well,
salat.
I'm sorry, that's not my question. My question is how to calculate it. You mentioned for different categories, different percentages. I'm talking about the savings which the ordinary people are involved with. And you mentioned that if they've got a small investment into a business, then instead of 2.5% on savings, it goes to 5% because it's a protection in your view. What I was asking you is there an agreement by the scholars on the same basis as there is on international finance in a bigger scheme?
Uh, if for the time being I don't take into consideration the last part of your statement, which I'm not sure I've understood, but my answer is that no, there is no agreement. What I have mentioned in the domain of business, talking about zakat, it's an ijtihad where most of the scholars don't agree with us. Most of the Muslim scholars believe that zakat is on savings, which is 2.5%, and it is on agricultural produce only. We are suggesting to expand the scope of it to industries, to service industry as well. Uh, Obviously, there are two possibilities. One is that a Muslim state agrees to our understanding and applies it in its economy. Well, that has not happened as yet. But when it comes to the individuals, for them to decide as to what amount of zakat they will pay, they will listen to our argument, which is obviously an effort to understand that the basic law of zakat that the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, gave, the Almighty gave us, uh, in the present times, how is it going to be applied? So, by analogy, that's what we are understanding. Just briefly, to give you an understanding of what analogy would do in case of zakat, uh, there were cows in the Arabian Peninsula on which zakat was, the formula was given, but there weren't any buffaloes. So when the when Islam came to the subcontinent, this new category was found. Now there could have been many possibilities. Scholars could have decided that buffalo is like sheep and goats. It's like camels. Or they decided that it's like cow. They could have decided that no, this is buffalo. It is not the animal which has been dealt with in zakat law. Therefore, we'll ignore it. Something has to be done about it. Industries have emerged. Now, are we going to put industries also in the category of businesses which are to be where zakat is to be levied? We are saying yes. Most of the scholars are saying no. They use their assets to decide how much zakat they have to give, because for them the mention of zakat for agricultural produce cannot be generalized. So that's what the difference of opinion is.
You could last 5 minutes for any open question, please. Yes.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Sir, what do you say about this? If UK government start collecting zakat, they say give us zakat, so the UK Muslims should give them zakat as Muslims. What do you think about that?
I know that the opinion is going to be divided, but I would say that the Muslims would respond by saying that you can very much collect zakat from us, but then we would want you not to spend it in avenues which are not acceptable. So you will not use zakat funds for the purpose of having defense hardware to be used against people without any justification. So some conditions will have to be imposed, but if you are using it for charitable purposes, we are living here, we have decided to live here, and our religion tells us that if our rulers are Muslims, they should demand from us zakat. If you, despite being non-Muslims, you are demanding zakat from us, Bismillah, we'll welcome.
Can non-Muslim government actually ask for zakat?
This is what the question was. The opinion would always be divided. If, for instance, a non-Muslim government decides to follow certain principles of Islam, like for instance, they decide that they will not charge riba anymore, instead of discouraging them, we'll welcome them.
I think the answer to that would be that the zakat is only 2.5% and income tax is 40%.
So they will take tax as well as zakat. So can they ask for both zakat and tax?
It's not happening even in the case of Muslim countries right now. But if they will do it, we will tell them that, you see, what you're doing is wrong, because don't take taxes, take zakat. It's, in our understanding, it really is going to be an incorrect approach, because what we understand is that a state should demand zakat and only zakat. So it's going to be a kind of a double levy, which is going to put extra unnecessary burden on the individual.
Any last question?
ज़कात अरबिक मीनिंग अरबिक लफ्ज़ हो सकता है, हम उसको कह सकते हैं कि वो गवर्नमेंट एक अपने मुस्लिम अवाम पर एक टैक्स लगा सकती है, जिसका मीनिंग है ज़कात, जो उनकी फलाह व बहबूद के लिए काम करता है. गवर्नमेंट को हक है कि वो इंसानों के ऊपर उसको खर्च करे. तो हम उसको कंफ्यूज क्यों कर रहे हैं ज़कात और टैक्स में? अगर हम उसको इजी वे एक्सप्लेन करना चाहें तो इस तरह नहीं कर सकते कि ज़कात एक टैक्स है जो एक मुसलमान हुकूमत को पे फर्ज है कि वो अपने अवाम से ले और अपने अवाम पे ही खर्च करे, और हम उसको, हमारे लिए इतना मुश्किल क्यों है समझना कि मेरा जो मैं कमा रही हूँ उस पर अगर गवर्नमेंट टैक्स ले रही है तो वो एक किस्म का, अगर इस्लामिक गवर्नमेंट ले रही है तो वो एक किस्म का टैक्स है जो मुझ पे खर्च करना है, मेरा फ़र्ज़ पूरा हो गया, इस्लामिक गवर्नमेंट का भी फ़र्ज़ पूरा हो गया. तो हम उसको इतना इजी वे क्यों नहीं एक्सप्लेन कर सकते? इंस्टेड ऑफ हम अरबिक लफ्ज़ ज़कात और टैक्स को हम कंफ्यूज करके मिक्स अप करके हमें बताया जा रहा है जो कि हमारी फ़िक्र हमें बता रही है. इंस्टेड अब हालात बदल गए हैं, इंसानों की ज़रूरतें बदल गई हैं, उन्होंने नए लफ्ज़ ईजाद कर लिए हैं. अरबिक मेरी ज़बान नहीं है, ठीक है. मुझे अगर मेरी इंग्लिश ज़बान होगी तो मुझे उस पर टैक्स इजीली समझ आएगा इंस्टेड ऑफ ज़कात के. और जो अगर मुस्लिम हुकूमत मुझसे टैक्स ले रही है मेरे लिए इजी है का मुझे ये बताएं कि अगर उन पे फ़र्ज़ है वो 2.something लें एज ए ज़कात, एज ए टैक्स. अगर अब हालात बदल गए हैं, गवर्नमेंट का खर्चा ज़्यादा हो गया है, अगर वो मैं ज़्यादा कमा रही हूँ तो उस पर अगर वो ज़्यादा टैक्स ले पे मुझ पे खर्च कर रही है, तो ये इजी वे नहीं है एक्सप्लेन करने के लिए, इंस्टेड हम कंफ्यूज हों.
जी देखिए, गुजारिश ये है कि ये हम डिस्कशन क्यों कर रहे हैं? इसलिए कर रहे हैं कि हमारे रब ने हमको हुक्म दिया है कि जहाँ तुम नमाज़ पढ़ो वहाँ तुम ज़कात भी दो. तो ज़ाहिर है कि हमारी अप्रोच यहाँ से शुरू होगी. हमारे रब ने जो हमें नमाज का हुक्म दिया है उसमें हमें उसकी रकतें भी उसने बता दी हैं अपने पैगंबर सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम के ज़रिए से. तो फ़जर के फ़र्ज़ की 2 हैं और ज़ोहर की 4 हैं, असर की 4 हैं, मगरिब की 3 हैं, इशा की 4 हैं, ठीक है ना. अब हम ये नहीं कह सकते कि यहाँ मुल्क में हम आए हैं तो यहाँ इन्होंने अल्लाह को याद करने का एक और तरीक़ा इख्तियार कर लिया. मकसद तो अल्लाह को याद करना था ना.
मैं इधर की बात नहीं कर
बात
रही,
ये भी ख़त्म नहीं हुई.
इस्लामिक हुकूमत की भी की बात कर रही हूँ, अगर पाकिस्तान में मैं रहती
मैं
होंगी तो उनकी टैक्स है ना, वो टैक्स मुझसे ले रहे हैं, तो वो कंफ्यूज क्यों कर रहे हैं? इस्लामिक गवर्नमेंट मुझे क्यों कंफ्यूज कर रही है कि आप ज़कात, जब मैं ज़कात का टाइम आता है मैं अपनी रकम बैंक से निकाल लेती हूँ, ठीक है, और वो मैं निकाल लेती हूँ, और मैं जो कमा रही हूँ पे उसमें मैं डायरेक्ट गवर्नमेंट को टैक्स दे रही हूँ।
मैं असल में वही बात कह रहा था जो आप फरमा रही हैं, ज़रा सुन लें मेरी बात। मैं ये गुजारिश कर रहा हूँ कि बिल्कुल इसी तरह से हम मुसलमानों को ज़कात को कैलकुलेट करना है, जैसे नमाज के बारे में हमारी रकतें हैं वो हमने कैलकुलेट करनी है और उतना हमने देना है अल्लाह के हक़ के तौर पर। ये तो एक मसला बिल्कुल तय है। अब ये दूसरा मसला है जो आप बयान फरमा रही हैं। बात ये है कि ये ज़कात जो हम देते हैं, अल्लाह ताला ये फरमा रहे हैं कि इसके अलावा तुम कुछ नहीं ले सकते। अब ये हुकूमत की नालायकी है, या आप कहिए नालायकी नहीं है, ज़बान का फ़र्क है, वो कुछ और ले रहे हैं। गुजारिश ये है कि वो कुछ और जो ले रहे हैं वो ज़कात की तरह कैलकुलेट नहीं कर रहे। मैं ये कहता हूँ कि इसमें हमारा क्या कसूर है? हम तो कैलकुलेट कर रहे हैं ना ज़कात, और हम उनको कुछ दे भी रहे हैं जो टैक्स के नाम से है। इससे हमारे देने के अमल में फ़र्क नहीं पड़ना चाहिए, सिवाय इसके कि हम कैलकुलेट ठीक करें और टैक्स भी ठीक दें। अब 3 इम्कानात हो सकते हैं। मैंने कैलकुलेट किया कि मुझे पाकिस्तान में एक साल में 2 लाख ज़कात देनी है, और मैंने देखा कि मैंने पाकिस्तान की हुकूमत को 2 लाख टैक्स दे दिया, मसला ख़त्म हो गया। मेरी ज़कात पहुंच गई, उन्होंने जो नाम भी उसका रखा, मुझे इससे कोई वास्ता नहीं है। मैं अल्लाह की राह में और भी ख़र्च करूं, ये मैं एक इजाफ़ी सदका खैरात करूंगा। दूसरा इम्कान ये है कि मेरी ज़कात तो बनती थी 2 लाख, मैंने टैक्स दिया है 1.5 लाख, तो अभी मुझे 50,000 और देने हैं लाज़िमन, इसलिए कि ये मेरी ज़िम्मेदारी है अल्लाह को। मेरे हुक्मरानों ने मुझसे 1.5 लाख लिया। एक तीसरा इम्कान ये है कि मैंने टैक्स दिए 2.5 लाख और मेरी ज़कात बनती है 2 लाख, तो मेरी चली गई। अब मुझे अल्लाह की राह में इजाफ़ी ख़र्च करना है, लेकिन हमें इसको अप्रोच दीन से करना है। यानी
वो तो
हमको
गवर्नमेंट को चाहिए ना, वो कैलकुलेट करके बता दे अवाम को कि हम टैक्स आपकी ज़कात से ज़्यादा दे रहे हैं, आप लोगों को कंफ्यूज ना करें, आपने ज़कात दे दी।
आपको ये मालूम है कि हुक्मरानों की, मुसलमान हुक्मरानों की ये भी ज़िम्मेदारी है कि वो मुसलमानों के लिए नमाज का एहतमाम करें। वो तो नहीं कर रहे। नमाज तो हमें फिर भी पढ़नी है।
वो तो हम पे है ना, हम जाएंगे ना।
नहीं, मैं गुजारिश कर रहा हूँ कि वो उनको इसका
टैक्स दे दिया तो ज़कात हो गई फिर।
मैं यही कह रहा हूँ।
Whether it's here in this country or in Pakistan?
देखें, इस कंट्री में अब एक एडिशनल प्रॉब्लम है, और वो ये है कि पाकिस्तान में जैसे तैसे हुक्मरान मुसलमान हैं, यहाँ वो गैर मुस्लिम हैं। ज़ाहिर है इस एडिशनल एक फ़र्क की वजह से फिर डिबेट होगी, डिस्कशन होगी, और इसमें ओपिनियन डिवाइडेड होगा। ये पहले भी मैंने किसी और की राय दी है, अभी भी मैं अपनी अंडरस्टैंडिंग बयान कर रहा हूँ, और इसमें कोई आदमी इख्तलाफ कर सकता है कि मुझे ये लगता है कि इसमें हर आदमी एक सब्जेक्टिव एक फ़ैसला करेगा कि मेरी इन हुक्मरानों ने जो रकम वसूल की है वो जहाँ जहाँ ख़र्च कर रहे हैं, क्या मेरा इत्मीनान है कि वो ज़कात के ख़र्च के नुक्ता नज़र से ठीक है। बाज़ लोग कहेंगे कि हाँ बिल्कुल ठीक है, वो तो बहुत देते हैं, एक सेफ्टी नेट होता है, अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट अलाउंस होता है, मेडिकल उसमें देते हैं, तो ज़ाहिर है कि उनका पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू आएगा कि वो ठीक ज़कात पे ख़र्च हो रहा है। मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि एक हिस्सा वो हमारे पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से गलत खर्च कर रहे हैं। इनके डिफेंस में जो पैसे जाते हैं उसमें वो उनको परवाह नहीं होती, इराक़ में बंदे मुसलमान मार रहे हैं, कहीं जाके मार रहे हैं, तो एक हिस्सा तो ठीक है जो ख़र्च कर रहे हैं वो उन एवेन्यूज़ पर के जो ज़कात ही के एवेन्यूज़ हैं, और एक हिस्सा वो ठीक नहीं कर रहे। इस वजह से मैं, ज़ाहिर है कि कोई और इदारा तो अब है नहीं जो ऐसा फ़ैसला करे, मैं अपनी ज़ात के बारे में ये फ़ैसला करूँगा, जो भी परसेंटेज है, कि इतना % तो जो मेरा टैक्स जा रहा है वो ज़कात हो सकता है, लेकिन इतना % नहीं हो सकता। वल्लाहु आलम बिस्सवाब।
I'm sorry, on this issue of income tax and zakat, see, somebody who's paying income tax is paying on what he's earning in that month. Zakat is end of the year on the savings. So technically, it is possible that somebody who's paying income tax never has to pay any zakat if he doesn't have any savings.
Very true.
Secondly, that zakat has to be delivered, as you said, according to certain standards. So it becomes too complicated for somebody to think that my income tax is paying for all these things, and it's impossible for an ordinary person to sort of work it out, whether it's a Muslim government or it is a non-Muslim government. And I think the two are different categories. And then who the zakat should be paid to? Because income tax can go to people who are not eligible for zakat. So I think these are the complexities of mixing the income tax.
You see, if there are some Muslims who decide to pay tax properly and honestly, and decide to pay zakat properly and honestly, I will salute them. Brilliant. But the only thing I would say is that a few years later they'll be eligible to receive zakat because they will be left with nothing. Here is a practical problem. The solution which many religious people have gone for is that they calculate and spend zakat honestly, properly, and they evade taxes. Evasion of taxes means they are telling lies. What it means is that they are deceiving their rulers, which is absolutely un-Islamic. So if you are telling me that we tell our Muslim brothers and sisters that pay both, I have no problems. But the problem is that it really is something which is probably not possible for most of the people. What we are saying is Muslim rulers should receive zakat. They are not doing their work, but they are receiving an amount instead of zakat. Muslims were asked to pay zakat to their rulers, and their payment should be considered as zakat. Somebody disagrees, most welcome.
Thank you very much. We have to conclude session because 9:30, because we have
Very
to.
relevant point.
You can talk personally, but we have to conclude the session. Yeah, you can ask personally. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for everybody coming, and thank you Khalid bhai for coming. Because we have to vacate the hall at 9:30.
वो जो आपने वो जो नहीं किया
आप आके पूछिए।
वो नहीं मिलेगी। आपसे दुआ करूँगा कि
ठीक है, और कुछ करने की जरूरत नहीं है ना।
अगर मैं पहले बहुत हो गया तो मेरी दुआ तो हो चुकी है। The other way around,
You will be there. On the gate.
thank you for coming. Thank you very much. इनाम देते हैं। माशाअल्लाह।
बहुत खुशी
इसमें भी मैं सर वो तो जो करते हैं हमें पता है कि मेहनत करनी चाहिए। एग्रीमेंट डिसएग्रीमेंट यार सही रहेगा ना। आप मेरे बात करें मैं सोचता रहूँगा, मैं आपसे करूँगा मेरे आप हम अपनी गुफ्तगू के अंदाज को परफेक्ट करें बस। उसके अलावा सच्ची बात है कोई किसी पे कॉपीराइट हो सकता है। सोचते रहेंगे लेकिन